Okay, so we left off on our chisel array, right? And the idea is that this would translate well into the animal head carving demo. The advantage, of course, is that as we make our animal head, you learn to think reductively, in addition to the fact that it will explain this sort of convoluted process of blacksmithing as you start to try and see around the gloves and chisels of the camera. So we've got to pass some dimensions here in our cube, length, width, and height. And one thing to be clear on is you can very easily pass just width, and height because the animal head is normally square bar. However, since we're doing parametric modeling, we can pretty much get away with whatever we want. And I think it's always fun to do that type of experimentation. So let's just make sure animal head works before we get too invested in this process. And we're going to pass 25 by 25 by 50. And you've got to remember that our cube, right, is 1 inch by 1 inch. Right, so 1 inch square bar is the standard. So that's our cube. And one thing to make our life easier is that we're going to make the center equal true. And that's just going to give us an orientation for the rest of the process. Because as we move our chisels and start cutting, you're starting to wonder like all of this, like, where am I, right? So you're like, what am I doing? Where am I? This is terrible. So let's label everything before we get too far and just say this is the animal head block. And then you're going to have to remove a subsection, and that will be in a process called the half-faced blow. And this is where we use the anvil to basically moosh away a good portion of the block, and that will form the brow ridge and nostrils of our animal shape. And then, just to clarify here, everything after our animal head block will be a difference function. So we need those curly braces included. And now we've basically deleted everything we've done. But for the half-face blow, it's not going to be center equals true. It's actually going to be about a quarter off. And so we're going to have to do some adjustments to the offset. Going to have to translate it in some direction. And we'll figure that out as we go. So there we go. We've taken out a quarter, but what we want is actually to just go straight through all the way to this vertex. So let's just assume that if we go length over 2, obviously we need to go backwards. There we go. And there's that unsolvable region again, so we're going to want to make length just a little bit bigger. So 2 millimeters is fine, and then over here to center it, we'll go back 1. So now we have our brow ridge formed, and our snout is here, and our eyes are over here. Could put little nostrils there. But we're going to want to adjust our half-face blow. So as a blacksmith, normally what we do is we give it a little bit of angle depending on how wide we want to flare our nostrils and the size of the mouth and the size of the eyes, and it's all proportional. So we end up using the half-face blow, right? So half-face blow at an angle. So we're going to pass that angle over here. So half-faced blow. And that angle, since it's being passed, it's really shallow. It's maybe 8 degrees. You can go 25, but it gets ridiculous. And normally we don't want the snout to be that small and the eyes to be this big. Now if you're doing an alligator, that's actually perfect. But if you're doing like a dragon or a hippo or many of the other things, you'll find you want that angle to actually go the opposite direction, like so. So now what we need to do is start cutting the eyes. So let's make some room for the eyes. And, oh, this is getting a little messy. Let's just indent that. There we go. And that one. So we're making the eyes here. And we need to go back and find our inverted ball chisel. There it is. And let's just see where we are. So if we put this right in the center, we've got like a clown nose, half a clown nose, and that's not what we want. So what we want to do is figure out how to get it close to where we imagined. And if I had to guess, where we moved our half-face blow might help us a little bit. So let's take some of that and see where it ends us up. So we're close, but we still need to move up. My guess is probably the width over 2, and we've lost it. So let's see where that is. So we're in the top corner, and we need to go, I guess, probably half of those dimensions. And I don't think we need this little -1. All right, so now we have an eye about where we want it. And this is one of those things where with the brow ridge, when we've done the half-face blow, I tend to move it up above our axes so we can work into it. So what I'm going to do is in the translate function, just add height over some variable, right? And then you look at the eyeball and you go, oh yeah, that's pretty good. I kind of want to go a little further. And so you have to ask yourself, do I go down or up in the divisor? And you could guess, or you could just try a couple of things and see what works. And one other thing here is our eye size is really big. We're going to want to change that regularly. So if we go into our code, we can introduce a new variable called eye size. And then we're going to pass that here, which is the diameter of our eye. Wrong button. And one thing I want to point out while that's rendering, okay, so it doesn't really know what it just received, right? Because we didn't declare it. So we need to pass the variable. It was 15. Let's go down to 10. One thing I want to point out here is this variable doesn't make sense. I think it's an artifact of when we made the inverted cone. We passed this information as point length, but we know our inverted ball doesn't have a point length, so we can actually delete that in our original code. Right? And it's always good to check and ask, like, am I passing variables that matter? So you see our object has failed, but then if we go back in and we delete that random 13 that was supposed to be for our cone, our chisel still functions, and it looks just like we want. Okay, so you want to make sure that that all makes sense, and then more importantly, I think it's best if we line up our eyes with the same orientation we have here, right? So that our cup chisel is actually coming in and making the eye shape where we want, and it's matching that same angle as our half-face blow. So we've got that figured out, and at this point, I think I would just adjust my brow ridge a little bit, maybe height over 9. So I'm satisfied with that. That's a good eye. And so now we can take this code, copy and paste. So now we've got 2, and we just need to figure out which variable to swap. And I'm guessing it's width. I am wrong. So let's go over to length. There's our full render. That'll show up in a second. So at this point, we can start doing our nostrils. There's our render. Beautiful. Love the eyes. So now we can put in our nostrils. And we're basically going to take the same information that we have here, right? And the only distinction we have to do at this point is really change it to our cone chisel, right? So over here we have our chisel point. We just need to put that in where our nostrils were. And we may end up passing a variable, right? It may be as simple as labeling our nostrils. But we want to figure out what that's going to look like. So let's see where we are. So this is one way to dot the eyes of your of your dragon, which is a great way to do it. It's a little deep, and we've got our half-face blow measured, but I think our diameter is much too large. So especially with pupils, you can go fairly small. So maybe 14 or even 10. There we go. Little pupils. So let's change this to pupils. Right, the centers of the eyes, and now we've got a good starting point for our nostrils. So we can take that and label our nostrils. And then what we're going to want to do, obviously, is go in a different direction. So we're going to adjust width. And now we have these massive nostrils, and that's not what we want. So we're going to need to offset this up to the height. Over 2. And let's take a look at where our chisel point shows up. There's our nostril, just making contact with that vertex. So then we can make a number called nostril depth. And our nostril depth can actually dictate, right, the point length that we've defined over here. So we can make our nostrils as deep as we choose and then pass that information parametrically. The only problem is when we do that, we're going to actually need to type a number in, right? So how deep do we want our nostrils to go? And so let's take a look at what's happening here. So we're just at the surface. And I'm not sure I want my nostril to be at this point, so we're going to get rid of this one for now. And then we're going to decide to move, instead of 4, let's do 8. There we go. So now we can bring our nostril down to minus nostril depth. Gotta spell it right. There's our render. Okay, and so our diameter is a little large, and we're a little high on the surface, so I think at this point what we can do is just go maybe up 2 millimeters, and then we get a small nostril. Right? And so we've got our cone, and it's cutting in, and at that point I think it's good shape. So we're going to take this information, copy it, bring it back up, and then we just need to make sure that one of these is inverted so that we have 2 nostrils. So that is a good start. And now we're going to save the file. And we're going to name it Mark 1 because we have not made it much further. There we go.